If you have ever moved to a new town or a new place, you know the routine you go through. You gotta find the grocery store. You gotta find the bank. You gotta find a new doctor. And if you're a person of faith, you start church shopping. You know that term, church shopping, can sound a little too consumeristic, but it's a painful reality. You know, in a culture, we live in this culture of choice. We get to choose the bank we patronize, the restaurant we dine at, where we buy groceries. We choose our gardener, piano teacher, our friends, and even our pastor. All of these choices can be fraught with hesitation and even some frustrating delays. And that's especially true when we got to look for a new church home. Let's be glad we don't live in Indianapolis, because according to many studies, there are more houses of worship per capita in that city than anywhere else in the United States. There is one for every 289 people. So if you're church shopping in Indianapolis or anywhere, you learn that the process is incredibly complex. You know, if you decide on Baptist, you still got to choose. It's going to be Free Will Baptist, American Baptist, Southern Baptist, National Primitive Baptist, Sovereign Grace Baptist. Or if you're Lutheran, is it ELCA, Missouri Synod, Wisconsin Synod? Well, we've kind of made that choice here today, haven't we? Right? If you're a good Presbyterian, do you go to Presbyterian Church USA, American Presbyterian Church, Orthodox Presbyterian Church? So many choices. That modern reality echoes that ancient question posed at that dusty well in the region of Samaria. When the woman said to Jesus, our ancestors, they worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say, well, we got to worship is in Jerusalem. And Jesus gives the famous response, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. See, Jesus is passing through Samaria, an area that Jews usually avoided because the typical Jew had a very low opinion of Samaritans. There was this animosity between Jew and Samaritans. It was deep and long-standing. They were separated by theological beliefs, political divides, and even ethnic tensions. Most Jews would extend their travel time when they were leaving Jerusalem. They would go down Jericho over to the west, or to the east rather, and go up the Jordan River Valley through an area that's now known as Perea. They would not go straight north through Samaria into Galilee, but that detour involved 5 to 7 days of travel. Now, today, when we travel, we can make similar detours. It might take a little more time to take them. You know, we want our driving time to be pleasant, not tedious or nerve-wracking. You know, we might look for the rural roads or bypasses to take us around New York City, or Philadelphia, Harrisburg, or Pittsburgh. But this detour was different. See, the Jews avoided Samaria because of disdain, not because of pleasure. They would rather add a week to their journey than risk rubbing shoulders with people they considered beneath them. But Jesus, he didn't take the long way around. Although an outsider to the Samaritans, he went straight through the region. Jesus chose the road that everyone else avoided because he knew it would take him to people who needed him. People who needed this taste of the living water. It was a courageous trip. It was made all the difference for this one woman at a well. Not only for her, but for the entire village who heard the good news. So why do we often prefer to go the long way? You know, we don't avoid certain roads because they're longer. We avoid them because, like driving through the heart of Philadelphia, they're uncomfortable. Like the ancient Jews who sidestepped Samaria, we take the scenic detour around anything that unsettles us. You know, conversations that we might fear. Neighbors we don't quite know. People who don't fit into our neat little categories. It's easier to fill our schedules so we don't have to stop, and it's easier to keep our eyes straight ahead so we don't have to see. Fear, pride, prejudice, simple inertia, they all whisper, Go the other way. Don't get involved. But when we choose comfort over courage, we miss the very encounters where God just loves to show up. Jesus was waiting for the woman at the well on that road most avoided. What life-changing conversations wait for us if we're willing to take our own Samaritan detour? You know, the lonely, the overlooked, the hurting, those people on the margins, they're not off on the side of God's mission, rather they're the center of it. So let us ask, who might be waiting along the road not taken? Maybe it's that one neighbor who just never has any visitors. Some young adult who's struggling with their purpose or identity. Maybe it's a refugee navigating a strange land, or maybe it's a coworker who's just carrying this grief that they just don't talk about. Maybe it's someone whose politics or background kind of makes you bristle. Like the woman at the well. They may not look like the kind of person you'd expect to see, but they can be thirsting for the living water all the same. The Bible gives us a lot of testimony about this. It says in Hebrews, don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Israel was commanded in Deuteronomy, you shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And Jesus famously told us in Matthew 25, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick, you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Perhaps the question for us is really simple. Will we keep skirting the roads that make us uncomfortable? Or are we going to dare to follow Jesus down that road less traveled to an appointment with someone who's waiting for Jesus to show up? Jesus stops at Jacob's well, and there, in the heat of the day, he meets a Samaritan woman. She comes alone, no friends, no companions. That tells us something there. Most women in the village would have drawn water in the cool morning, sharing laughter and news as they carried their jars. But this woman comes at noon, when no one else is around. And to a Jew like Jesus, she is an outsider in every way. She's that Samaritan, those despised people, they're heretics, they're half-breeds. She is a woman, and in those days, rabbis did not strike up conversations with women in public, not even their own wives. This woman carries a painful personal story. She's had 5 former husbands. Now lives with a man who's not her husband. Many scholars suggest when they read this that she's been passed from one man to another, left vulnerable each time, always at the mercy of someone else's decisions. However we want to read it though, her past was complicated, her reputation tarnished. She's doubly margined, triply dismissed. In her world, she had the wrong race, the wrong gender, the wrong reputation. Everything about her says she should be invisible, she should be avoided, she should be left alone. But yet, Jesus engages her. Doesn't turn away, doesn't hurry past. He begins a conversation with asking for a drink. It's almost like he says, you matter to me. You're worth my time. You're not beyond the reach of grace. And their conversation turns from literal water to spiritual thirst. Everyone who drinks of this water is going to be thirsty, but if you drink the water I give you, Jesus says, you'll never be thirsty. In fact, it's going to gush up and become a spring inside you. See, Jesus is naming a truth that she already feels. Life has left her thirsty. Those repeated relationships, a solitary trip to the well, the wary banter with this strange Jewish man. Here's a woman who's been searching, who's been longing, trying to fill a void. The well indeed is deep, but her thirst is deeper still. And here's the grace. Jesus doesn't shame her for that thirst. He doesn't scold her for the path she's taken or for the baggage that she now carries. No, he offers her something that she lacks, living water. Not a sip, but a spring inside her, bubbling up with hope, with dignity, with belonging, with even eternal life. Because that's what living water does. It flows down to those dry cracks in our souls. It refreshes those places that have been parched by shame, by disappointment, by loneliness. It washes over our wounds. It revives the heart. And each one of us has our own type of thirst. It can be the fear or the sorrow of rejection, fear of being unseen, just the exhaustion from carrying secrets. Jesus sees all of that, and he still says, I give you water, I quench your thirst. Well, now the woman is intrigued. Yet when Jesus names the hidden truth of her life, she deflects. Notice how she shifts the topic to religion. Yeah, you're a prophet, Lord, but our ancestors said you got to worship here, but you say in Jerusalem. What a classic move. When faith gets too close, when it exposes our hearts, we retreat into a safer ground. We debate denominations, doctrines, dogma, worship styles, liturgy, praise bands, affirming, traditional. But Jesus just does not play that game. He honors her question, but he reframes it entirely. Worship is not about the mountain, it's not about the temple, it's not about Samaria, it's not about Jerusalem. It's worshiping God in spirit and truth. In other words, worship is not about where, it's about who. It's not about geography, it's about authenticity. It's not about the external trappings, it's about the heart. And that's the radical gift of Jesus' answer. True worship is borderless. It crosses cultures, it crosses customs, transcends arguments and labels. It draws us into the presence of God. So the woman at the well was caught in a centuries-old religious dispute. We are too. For how often we will fuss many churches over styles of music, a political alignment, online versus in-person, and other labels. We overcomplicated worship. Timothy Merrill is a contributor to Homiletics Journal. For 13 years, he and his wife lived in Shanghai, the People's Republic of China. While there, he pastored an international congregation. And that role, he said, was interesting for many reasons, not the least of which is the government's attitude towards denominations. It does not recognize them. So believers, thinking they could worship at a United Methodist church, disappointed. Those who looked for a Lutheran church couldn't find one. Presbyterian, United Church of Christ, Episcopus, Baptist, Assembly of God, Evangelical, Disciples of Christ, Free Methodist, all at a loss. See, in the eyes of the People's Republic of China government, you're either a Protestant, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, or Jewish. That's it. Now, Pastor Merrill says he remembers that the congregation rather liked that experience of true ecumenicism in practice. Those denominational distinctives, obscure theological differences, creedal favorites, different peculiarities were all set aside. Because as Christians living in a foreign and hostile culture, they simply were glad for the opportunity to worship and break bread together. They could all agree on one thing. Jesus is Lord, everything else is details. So if Jesus came church shopping today, what would he look for? Would he care if the choir was in robes or jeans? Would he prefer pews or theater seats? Would he be checking the doctrinal statement for all nuances? Or would he look for a place where the Spirit is alive, truth spoken in love, and people are welcomed and lives are changed? See, at the end of the day, church shopping isn't really about shopping. It's about thirst. It's about longing. It's about coming to the well and finding living water. And Jesus is still waiting there. Not behind the veil of the temple, not locked away in doctrinal statements confined to one mountain or the other mountain, but in a worship that's beyond borders. His invitation still stands. Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water I will give them will never be thirsty